Yeah, Professor Paul Griffin.
Morning.
Are we all experts now?
Look, I think that's funny because it's true, those sort of clips. And, it's great that people are informed and trying to learn. And I think, people's knowledge is going to help them get through this. But, some people might have gone a bit far.
What's the biggest misunderstood matter about COVID-19 that you keep having to correct?
Gee, there's so many. I think one point I really want to clarify is a lot of people saying, why don't we all just go out and get it and this will all be done with, it'll help the economy. But unfortunately, the loss of life, the burden on the healthcare system, those costs both for people, but also economically would be far greater if we did that. So, the strategy we're doing now is clearly the right one and people are doing a really good job at doing that. And in some ways, it's probably been more successful than we predicted. And, that's only a good thing. While it's frustrating and this is a huge burden on people, it's really good that we're in this position.
You must have had to answer that question quite a bit. The use or the misuse of the term herd immunity has been everywhere, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And yeah, you're right. It's getting asked a lot. And, fundamentally, the concept of getting herd immunity from getting a disease rather than a vaccine is just fundamentally flawed. It's just not something that's able to be done in this case.
On the question not of herd immunity but of general immunity about our own body, what does someone's general immunity do to help them fight off COVID-19? We've seen lots of diets printed in newspapers and magazines purporting to boost our immunity. Can we really do that?
I think that's a big myth too. It would be great if we had something that could boost immunity, obviously for all infectious diseases, and there are lots of things that are being marketed or sold as that sort of thing, but unfortunately there's nothing proven to boost immunity. Other than, of course, a good healthy lifestyle, the right balance of exercise and diet and rest and those sort of things. But there's no magic pill. There's nothing that we can take to boost our immunity to protect us.
I've had a text from Nick in Capalaba. He says that how long does it last on surfaces? I remember reading somewhere about the Diamond Princess way back in February when that first cruise ship docked in Yokohama in Japan. There were reports that the live virus was still being found on surfaces 17 days after passengers had come off. What do we know?
Look, I think we're still learning. I think the consensus at this stage would probably be that the upper limit is probably 3 or 4 days on surfaces that it likes, the hard, shiny things. On softer things, it's probably not that long. And I guess the main thing that people want to know about is often on skin. And fortunately, our microbiome, the sort of normal, healthy things that we have on our skin do reduce that time a lot. So it's probably only 5 or 10 minutes on the skin.
Okay, just a quick one I'll squeeze in before we take a call. But I better just say to people, if you've got a question about COVID-19, now is the time to ring. 1300 222 612. 1300 222 612. Just before we go to our calls, I've got one more question. If we recovered from COVID, is the body immune to having it again?
And this is one of the problems with the concept of herd immunity here is we really don't know the answer to that. We think it's probably less likely that a lot of people will get it again, but it's not zero. So we're not sure how protective immunity is and how long it lasts from natural infection yet. So the concept of saying I'm going to get it, then I'm going to be protected, again, just isn't the case yet.
So I've heard, obviously we're all pinning our hopes on a vaccine, but we keep also hearing 12 to 18 months. Tell me about the breakdown of that timeline. What are the scientists doing across that 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, so I can speak a bit more to that, actually. It's exciting to be able to say a bit more about that today. So I spoke a little generally last week, and, obviously a lot of people locally are aware that UQ are doing some great work in that space, but they're not the only ones that are working on vaccines. There's been one trialled in the US already in healthy volunteers, so what we call a phase 1 or the first stage of trials. And here in Brisbane, a team that I work with are going to be trialling one very soon, so probably starting those trials around mid-May. So that's only, 3 or 4 weeks away.
So what form does a trial take?
So what we do first is we want to prove that it's safe and likely to be effective in healthy volunteers. A relatively small number, so around 100 or so people, healthy volunteers, will get that vaccine. We'll watch them very carefully to make sure that it goes well, and we do some tests to make it look, so we can tell if it looks like it's going to work. So obviously a lot of work goes into these vaccines to get to this point, which is why it's taken a bit of time to get here. So, we have to know through really robust animal studies and preclinical lab work that we think it is going to be really safe and really effective, or we wouldn't get to this stage. But then what we do is we give it to those people, we monitor them really carefully, make sure it is as safe as we think it will, and pretty sure it will be. And then we check to see if they've got some immunity from it. So, and then if that works, works, we very quickly progress to more trials in more people so that we can prove that it actually does its job in the population. So we're going to be starting a trial with a vaccine from a company called Novavax, which is a US company. And that vaccine, again, the data so far is very favourable, which is why we're progressing. So again, that's about 4 weeks' time here in Brisbane.
So you are part of a research group and you've been contacted by Novavax, a US corporation, is it? Is it a private company?
So they're a big company that have made quite a few vaccines, and I've done some work with them on a number of different vaccines in the past. They responded similarly to Ebola and developed a vaccine for that, as well as some common things like respiratory syncytial virus that we see every year. But, obviously, like a lot of people, they dropped everything and worked really hard on this to come up with a vaccine that hopefully will help.
And you work for the Mater Hospital. Is this research part of that?
It's through another company that I do some work for called Nucleus Network, which is a dedicated clinical trials company. So do this all day, every day. They're the biggest of its kind in Australia. So, focused really on doing these sort of clinical trials so we can help develop vaccines for things just like this.
And have you been burning the midnight oil at the moment about, that you must be talking to people in different time zones about all of these developments?
It certainly takes a big team and a lot of work. These sort of things usually take many years. So while some people might be a bit frustrated or disappointed at the 12 to 18 months it's being quoted, this is years and years of work condensed in a really short space of time. So, a big team who are really good and working really hard to get this.
I have this mental picture of you all in different spots across the globe, sort of, talking to each other about what you're finding in your labs.
It's basically what's happening, yeah. So, and obviously time differences and things mean that a lot of these meetings take place at all hours, but, we're all happy to do, obviously, because we want to get there quickly.
Associate Professor Paul Griffin is with me. He's the Director of Infectious Diseases at the Mater Hospital. Give us a call if you've got any questions about COVID-19. This man can answer them. 1300 222 612. Janet has sent me a text. She says, when I visit my elderly parents, I socially distance, but I do pat the dog. Can the virus live on pet fur? I've seen a number of people ask that one.
Yeah, so we know it survives on a number of different surfaces. The exact length of time will depend on too many variables to give you an exact figure. I guess the simple thing, and again, this is why we come back to these fundamental messages around hand hygiene, is if you pat or play with the dog, it's probably always a good idea to do your hand hygiene afterwards for a number of reasons. So if you keep that up and do that well, then you'll be protected.
I've heard you answer this question before, but never too much information. Is hard soap more effective for cleaning hands than soft hand wash? And is warm water preferable to cold water?
So soap is effective, as are the alcohol-based hand rubs, provided the percent is high enough, and we'd ideally want over 70%, and as well as provided that you do it for long enough and do it well. So you really do have to get in all the different spaces, but certainly any soap and warm versus cold doesn't really make too much difference.
Just on that, disinfectant, we're all spending lots of money at the moment. Are there any home solutions that provide a good disinfectant antibacterial properties?
I think simple bleach is still one of the best ones for cleaning hard surfaces, and obviously that's contained in most domestic, particularly bathroom cleaning products. So, and you can buy that in quite sizable quantities for not that much, and I haven't seen any supply issues with those sort of products. So simple bleach or alcohol-based things as well. I know people are getting spray bottles with alcohol-based things, and that will work as well. So
we don't need to be spending on the big brands, just the plain old bleach will do.
That's right.
Now, Paul, there's a story today out from Spanish researchers who say that they've been detecting lesions a little bit like chickenpox appearing on the feet of coronavirus patients. I don't mean to spring that on you if you haven't seen it today, but what might be behind that?
It's hard to know what's behind it. I mean, we know with a lot of viral infections, a rash or different skin things are quite common, and there are some viruses that are notorious for causing different types of rashes. So, things on the skin from viruses is pretty common, to be honest, and it might come down a little bit to the individuals there, for example, but there's certainly been reports of different kinds of rashes all over the world with this, and we're still learning a lot about exactly what might cause those. Often it's essentially an inflammation sort of thing, like we see cause the lung problems as well. So, a rash isn't entirely unexpected with this, but not the commonest symptom that we've heard of.
A few weeks ago, we heard about that symptom of losing your taste and smell in the early parts of the virus. Have you heard any more about that?
Yeah, we've certainly seen people that have reported that, so that's not uncommon, to be honest. So often referred to as anosmia, so the lack of ability to smell. So yeah, that is something that we are seeing. So part of the syndrome of symptoms that people are getting.
And I guess that must be common across other respiratory viruses because it's just that upper respiratory tract that kind of swells and your taste buds and your nose and...
That's right. So, whether it be due to just simple congestion or other things, it seems to be more common with this than perhaps other respiratory viruses. But again, we're still learning about this virus these days.
Associate Professor Paul Griffin is the Director of Infectious Diseases at the Mater Hospital, and he's with me this morning on ABC Radio Brisbane. We're coming up to 9:45. Lots of questions coming in on text. One from JP. He says, she says, why will coronavirus get worse in winter months?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we certainly see other respiratory viruses, particularly the flu, go up in winter. And, our peak here often, coincidentally, is around Eka time. And it's thought that there's obviously some temperature and environmental factors, whether it survives slightly longer in the cooler temperatures and with changes in humidity. But there's also a lot of behavioural factors that come into play in winter. People tend to co-locate indoors a lot more and be in closer proximity. So there's probably some behavioural as well as environmental factors there. Simple answer with COVID-19 is we're not sure what role those will play. It seems to just more be the pandemic rolling on rather than it be particular temperatures or environmental conditions in the places that it's at its worst. So we don't really know, but if people keep doing the things that they're doing now that are working really well, hopefully we won't see too much of that.
And we don't really face a brutal winter here in Brisbane, so we don't have such a huge variation in temperatures during our winter months. Some questions trickling in on Facebook also. Just a reminder, you can watch what's happening here in our studio on our Facebook page right now, ABC Brisbane Facebook page, if you want to have a look at Paul Griffin's smiling face. Michelle on Facebook says, why are Australia Post employees not wearing protective gear? Have health experts given this advice to government?
So we know that if people adhere to those fundamental messages we're getting out there at the moment about social distancing and hand hygiene, that the use of protective gear actually has very little role. So if those people deliver their packages and go about their business staying at least that 1.5 metres away from everybody and doing their hand hygiene, then the use of protective gear probably won't actually add that much. And it is something that we are trying to make sure we have enough of for our healthcare workers if we do happen to see lots of cases like many parts of the world. So if they do those simple things, they'll be protected.
Also on Facebook this morning, Kathy says, how long do you think this will drag on for? Do we have to stay in self-isolation as it all has a big impact on mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, people haven't lost sight of the consequences of all this. So these decisions haven't been taken lightly, and it's been a delicate balance between obviously the economy and people's well-being versus what we need to do for this virus. So people have done a really good job. I don't think anyone expected us to be as successful as we have been. And I think the time will come very soon where the balance will be reassessed and maybe we'll be able to go back a little bit or half a step back and watch carefully and make sure we don't see transmission become uncontrolled. And if that happens, then maybe another small backward step in some of these restrictions. But it will take time. The last thing we want to do is be a bit complacent and think we've got this and undo things and end up with a really big spike. And some countries have experienced that already. So it's not something that we can say we're on top of completely yet. We need to keep doing this. But yeah, I think you're right. We need to go back at least a little bit.
We can't pin down a timeline just yet.
We're monitoring the status of the new cases every day, where they're coming from, what sort of transmission events we're seeing. And so, at the moment there's very few. So I think we're, doing a really good job, and I think we'll be able to relax some things very soon. It's a big decision that's being made at the top level, and I know the discussions are happening. So, hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll at least have a little bit more flexibility.
I spoke to the Queensland Health Minister this morning, and he said that community transmission in Queensland is still at a very low level. We've seen some in Brisbane, some on the Gold Coast, and a little bit in Cairns. What does that mean to the layperson?
So what that means is that the majority of cases we've seen were directly imported or contacts of imported cases. So these were people that returned from overseas somewhere with the virus and perhaps infected someone they lived with, for example. The community transmission is the cases we can't identify a link like that. So the ones that we really worry about, that people maybe picked up going out about doing their daily, shopping or whatever, they picked it up there, and we haven't seen that. So that's a really good sign that we're not seeing that. So, the risk about just going out and doing things that you're allowed to do and catching this virus right now is exceedingly low. But again, we don't want to get complacent and relax too quickly or too much.
Rosalind has sent me a message on Facebook Live. She may have missed your earlier comment about this, but she says, why create a vaccine? Why not try herd immunity first? We already have a flu vaccine that doesn't work due to the fact that the flu mutates too quickly. Perhaps the coronavirus will keep mutating as well, rendering it useless. What's your opinion?
Yeah, so a few things there. And these are tricky concepts to grasp. I completely appreciate that. The flu vaccine, while it's not perfect, actually works really well. So again, it's not 100% and people can still get the flu after having the vaccine, but it's likely to be much milder, much less severe, and they're likely to be less infectious. So they're all really big positives. But we know the flu vaccine certainly helps us control it at a population level. And exactly, it does change every year, but that's why we formulate the flu vaccine every year to address that. So the flu vaccine is a really good vaccine, and I'd certainly encourage people to get that every year. In terms of this, if we try to achieve herd immunity by undoing these restrictions, the loss of life would be so great that it would far surpass the economic and social consequences that we're under now. So we would just simply lose too many people for that to be a viable option.
And again, just repeating, I'll just turn your microphone off and just repeat, you can clear your voice. I'm wearing you out here. Just repeating what you said earlier about herd immunity is a concept that we move towards when we do have a vaccine and we can do it safely. We don't move towards herd immunity without a vaccine.
That's right. The loss of life and the overburdening of our healthcare systems would be astronomical and far outweigh any perceived benefits in getting herd immunity through that. The ideal situation would be that a vaccine is developed and that gives us herd immunity so everyone's protected without having to get the disease.
Paul Matt has asked, New Zealand is pushing to eliminate the virus. Do you think that we can achieve that here?
They're doing a great job, there's no question. And elimination through these strategies is really hard to achieve, but they look like they're doing a fantastic job with that. I wouldn't like to promise that we can do the same here, just a different country, more people, much bigger, more complex situations. So, again, we're doing a great job with what we're doing now, but trying to get that to elimination means keeping up these restrictions or greater for a really long time, and that might just be impossible.
So New Zealand, just to sort of bring us up to date, they had a low number of cases to begin with. They did well on that contact tracing, searched out everybody. They do have a low population, so it was kind of easy, and they are spread out, so we're not looking at sort of people living in dense cities like we do in New York.
Yeah, exactly right. It's a much different location. So can't overstate how good a job they've done. Those measures are difficult, and they've done a really good job, but I'm not sure we'll be able to do the same here. There are some measures that obviously the government are trying to implement, and I've heard some news today about an app that will help with contact tracing. Those sort of things are vitally important, and I'd encourage people to participate in as much of those sort of interventions as possible, because anything we can do to help identify cases and lock them down early and prevent the spread will help us enormously.
Yeah, I think that app is going to send a message to your phone when you have been in contact with a known case. It obviously raises some privacy implications.
It does, and it might be a concept that people are uncomfortable with, but anything that we can get to help us identify those cases and contact those people and make sure that they don't spread it on. The real trick, or one of the real tricks with this virus, is that it's so infectious when people have so few symptoms. So a lot of people don't recognise they've got it and go to work or go about their business and spread it. So if we can contact those people and say, hey, be on the lookout for these things and help lock that down early, that'll be something that'll reduce that community transmission. It'll enable us to locate it so we can be more targeted with our interventions, and will go a long way, I think, into helping us relax these restrictions in a targeted way.
Another question from Debbie about those cleaning products. She says, is methylated spirits okay to spray on benches and surfaces to kill the virus?
It's likely to work, yes. I mean, some of those products, if used directly, can harm surfaces, so I don't want to bleach your bench tops or mark them or anything like that. So
you won't be held responsible.
In an inconspicuous area first, perhaps, but those sort of things will help, yes.
Yeah, okay. And on the issue of treatment of this virus, we've heard US President Donald Trump banging on about hydroxychloroquine, which is used for malaria usually. I know that comes with all the caveats that, he is not a doctor, he is not an expert. He's been pushing this drug because he says that in some clinical cases it had an impact. What's your view on that?
I think there's been quite a bit of irresponsible reporting over these therapies. The labelling of any of these things as a cure has given a lot of people false hope, and it's not just been President Trump that's done that. Obviously, there's a lot of activity trying to look at all sorts of drugs, new drugs, repurposed drugs like hydroxychloroquine, like the HIV medicine, Kaletra, that people are talking about. And all these drugs at various times have shown some promise, but at this stage, the evidence suggests that there's no drug that's proven to be effective. So, many people, myself included, are participating in lots of clinical trials to try and see if these drugs will help. It's likely that any that do will probably have a small effect at maybe making people better a little quicker or a little less severe. They're not going to do what a vaccine will do. And as I said, it's been a bit frustrating and irresponsible how people have been reporting a lot of these. So in short, no proven cures yet, but we're all working hard to trial lots of things.
Daryl asks, is there any information around vitamin B providing resistance support?
So the main thing to make sure people are protected from this as best as possible is just to simply be as healthy as you can. And that's where things like the right balance of diet and exercise and those sort of things. Additional vitamins, again, like a lot of things, have not been proven to provide any additional support. And if you've got a good, healthy, balanced diet, it's probably not going to contribute much.
You're on ABC Radio Brisbane Mornings. We have Associate Professor Paul Griffin, Director of Infectious Diseases at the Mater Hospital, with us this morning. You can also watch along on Facebook Live. He's answering your questions this morning. Have you got a question about COVID-19? 1300 222 612 is our number here, or text 0467 922 612. Associate Professor Paul Griffin is with me this morning. Another question has come in. Is it safe for kids and teachers to be at school?
So obviously this is causing lots of concern for lots of people, but I can reassure everybody that where these cases are coming from is being really carefully monitored. And if we saw cases children to children spread or children to adults, it would have been a really different story with the schools. But fortunately with this virus, it doesn't seem to infect a lot of children, and they don't seem to be passing it to each other or to adults. So given that we're seeing a lot of the transmission occurring in adults, kids at home are more likely to probably get it from their parents or adults at home than they are from school. So that's why the schools were open as long as they have been and are being talked about going back. So again, that's not a simple decision that's being taken lightly. It's an educated decision based on expert advice.
This next one might be a bit tricky, so please don't. I don't want to pressure you, but why has testing dropped from 5,000 to 6,000 people last week to 1,000 to 2,000 this week? I'm not even sure where those numbers come from.
Yeah, so it's simply that we're seeing fewer people come in. So the criteria for testing actually became more liberal just over a week ago. So basically, if people have a fever or respiratory symptoms, they can certainly get tested. We did have some issues for a while with availability of certain reagents with the test, so we were not able to do as many as we would like. Those things have been addressed now, so we can test people that need it. And as I say, that's people with a fever over 38 or respiratory symptoms can certainly get tested. But we've seen a lot fewer people be symptomatic or concerned about this and fewer people presenting. So the test is out there if you need it.
Another question from Deborah. She says, because it's been reported that a huge percentage of carriers are asymptomatic, why can't people at least have their blood tested for antibodies to see if they've had it and are they immune and they won't get it again?
A good question, and one we get commonly, and the simple answer is the development of antibodies takes more time. So it's likely that those people would test negative even whilst they're able to be spreading the virus, and it would only be essentially after they're recovered or are close to recovering that those antibody-based tests would become positive. So lots of talk about trying to roll out really quick ones because we can do rapid antibody tests, but unfortunately their role in the acute illness, so while people are able to spread this disease, is very little. And the test we've got now is a really good one, and that's the swab in the nose where we actually directly detect the virus, and that's positive well before those antibody tests are.
That prompts a question from me, a question from the floor. It seems like it hangs around in the human body for a long time. Sometimes you get 30 days before people kind of come out the other side. Are antibodies building up that entire time? Like, when would an antibody test show that you've had the virus and you're out the other side if you're asymptomatic?
And that's why these antibody tests just aren't helping us much at the moment, because they don't really answer those questions, and they also don't correlate with people being protected. So just having a positive antibody test doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to get this again. There's a lot of work underway trying to work out what sort of, because there's lots of different types of antibodies. Maybe there's a different type of antibody that might correlate better with protection. But back to your question about timing. So there's two types of antibodies. We've got one that's quite non-specific that comes up first, and that's usually only positive 3 or 4 days after you first get the infection. But the one that tells us if you're likely to have sort of more lasting protection infection, the one that comes up second, that probably only comes up at around 2 weeks. So
Right.
you'd probably have to do 2 antibody tests, one early on, but not too early, and then one later on to show what we call a seroconversion, or that you've changed from that first type to the second type. So that's why the antibody tests just really don't help us at the start. And that test with the nose swab, we actually look for the actual virus there, so it's really sensitive even early.
And I guess in the whole puzzle of the vaccine, this serology testing, is that what it's called? Antibody
that's
testing?
right.
That has to fit into the whole puzzle, doesn't it? Because you administer a vaccine, but then we also have a waiting period to see whether the antibodies have properly built up in people's immune systems.
That's right, and sometimes even getting a blood test that shows lots of antibodies doesn't mean you're protected from the infection. So that's why we use those, what we call correlates of immunity initially, so we use those blood tests, but later on in the bigger trials we'll have to see if people are actually protected, because obviously that's what we want the vaccine to do, so that's what we want to measure, and that's in the sort of second and third phase trials that we'll hopefully get to pretty soon.
Wendy from Tarragindi says, the ABC reported yesterday that there are clinical trials underway to see if the tuberculosis vaccine can be used to boost immunity against COVID-19. How would that work?
Yeah, so some interesting work, and I don't think we really fully understand that mechanism. So, but lots of good work underway. So, hopefully anything that works will be a plus, but we're just not sure yet.
We'll get some more information about that as that trial keeps going. Associate Professor Paul Griffin is the Director of Infectious Diseases at the Mater Hospital. Will you come back next week and answer more questions?
Be a pleasure.
Thanks very much. It'll be good to see you, and we'll all stockpile those questions for you.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
After the news, wash your hands and